with Zach LaVine electing to have season-ending surgery on his foot, how does that affect the Chicago Bulls' plans at the trade deadline? We're going to talk about it. And then you already know, we're going to go ahead and dive into some other things on how the Chicago Bulls can clean up their mess. Y'all know we're going to talk about it, break it down. But you know, you got to hear the music first. Cognac, gang. Shy Boys Podcast with the Cognac Boys. I'm Cognac Boy Bobby, and I'm holding it down on another episode of Shy Boys Podcast with me and my co-host C-Dub. If you like what you're listening to today, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell as well. We know it's been a lot of things going on with the Chicago Bulls these last few weeks. We've seen injuries. We've seen players go down for the entire season. We've seen Chicago Bulls wins. We've seen Chicago Bulls losses. But what in particular does it mean since Zach LaVine is now out for the Chicago Bulls? How does Zach LaVine's injury affect the Chicago Bulls playing at the trade deadline? I'm here to let you know right now, it's already been a limited market for Zach LaVine. And as of right now, with him now being out of the market is now very, very limited when it comes down to what the Chicago Bulls can do with this particular team. We already knew that Zach LaVine was the guy. He was the max money guy. He was the guy that had a lot of talent, but didn't necessarily know how to channel it enough to where the Chicago Bulls can go out here and win enough games. Zach LaVine was the guy. Zach LaVine, maybe not, is not so the guy right now. But as of right now, the plan for the Chicago Bulls should be real simple. Now you got to look to what players are on your team to where you can go ahead and see what can you do to move forward. Me personally, I am one of those guys that say that the Chicago Bulls have 5 young players that they can move forward with. Those 5 guys, Kobe White being number 1 at the top of the list, Ayo Dosunmu being number 2, Patrick Williams being number 3, Julian Phillips number 4, and Dalen Terry being number 5 as the young 5 players that the Chicago Bulls can now move forward with. I know that Zach LaVine is a guy that came out here and pretty much said that, hey, I want to lead a city. I want to go ahead and request a trade. I want to see if you guys can move me to one of my desired destinations. We know some of those desired destinations included early on as being one Sacramento, being one of the teams in LA, et cetera, but we don't necessarily know what the legit answer was for Zach LaVine. We just know that Zach LaVine was that guy that you can potentially move so you can garner in a lot of players or just a few players and a few assets to see if you can help the Chicago Bulls continue to move forward. Now the Chicago Bulls, with Zach LaVine being out, now you have to come to a decision on who's next within this trade talk, who's potentially that you're willing to give up. Who can you potentially give up to say, hey, we're going to push this thing forward? One of those guys can be DeMar DeRozan. One of those guys can be Nikola Vucevic. Another guy can be Alex Caruso. And if you're talking to me, one of the guys here on Shy Boys Podcast, I'm telling you, right now, the guy that holds the most value, in my opinion, is Alex Caruso. Alex Caruso is the ultimate basketball player that you can plug in just about any situation and see if he can fit perfectly for your team. I know a lot of teams that are out there competing and contending for championships can really use Alex Caruso on their team. One of those teams is the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns, I don't think they have the assets to acquire Alex Caruso from the Chicago Bulls. But I think if the Phoenix Suns add a guy like Alex Caruso, they will be in great favor or be in a great situation to where Alex Caruso can fit in perfectly and help propel the Phoenix Suns to championship. That's just how I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at Nikola Vucevic as a guy who, yes, he's older, but the contract, I believe, is only $18 million per, which is still a favorable deal for teams that might be missing out on a big to help complete on what they're trying to do to go ahead and play and have a push for that championship. DeMar DeRozan is another guy. This is a guy who comes in, he's a proven all-star. He's a proven fourth quarter scorer. He's a proven guy that can go ahead and get you a bucket when things become stagnant within your offense on whatever team that may be. So the Bulls have a lot of things that they can go into, or I wouldn't say a lot, but they have some options that they can explore to see if any of these guys can help now start pushing on this new Chicago Bulls brand of basketball. Understand that Zach LaVine was the number one guy since he requested a trade. So that's something that we have to think about in that regard. And I think that in this aspect, his injury affects the Chicago Bulls, and now it limits the market in a major way. Not having Zach LaVine being available for trade limits the market in a number of ways. I know there's going to be a number of people that come out and speculate and say that, hey, Zach LaVine elected, along with Clutch Sports, to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and get this surgery so we can make sure that the foot is good to go for the following season. But it's going to be some other people that come out and say, hey, Zach LaVine heard the rumblings and heard the conversation coming between the Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons. And Zach LaVine didn't necessarily want to go to the Pistons, so he elected to have the surgery that wasn't really recommended by the Chicago Bulls coaching staff, but instead consulted between Zach LaVine and Clutch Sports, and then he went ahead and elected to have the surgery. I will say after all those things transpire, this has placed Zach LaVine in a limited market, or at least the Chicago Bulls having limited opportunities to push the Chicago Bulls team forward. It's a lot of things you have to consider. I don't know if you're the Chicago Bulls that you want to get rid of Kobe White. Me personally, absolutely not. I don't know if you're the Chicago Bulls if you want to go ahead and look at moving Ayo Dosunmu. Me personally, absolutely not. I don't know if you're the Chicago Bulls if you want to go ahead and move Patrick Williams. Me personally, I'm looking at all those things and saying, hey, maybe you can move Patrick Williams depending on what the package is in return. Then you're looking at Julian Phillips. I don't know if I'm so sold on getting rid of Julian Phillips. And the same thing with Dalen Terry. Me personally, I want to see these young guys continue to grow, continue to develop, and be solid role players for the Chicago Bulls. So Zach LaVine injury is a major gut punch to the Chicago Bulls for sure. But I don't think it affects the Chicago Bulls and what they want to do per se as much as a lot of people like to think. Me personally, I like to think of Zach LaVine. Yes, he's hurt. Yes, you might not be able to move him right now before the trade deadline. You might have to wait until the offseason or maybe even further. So my thing is that you still have enough guys on this team to where you can make drastic moves. Those drastic moves, excluding Zach LaVine, will come at the expense of DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, Alex Caruso, players like that. You will have to look at those players and see if you can get anything out of these guys so you can make your current basketball team just a little bit better. Because we know that DeMar is on an expiring contract. We know that Nikola Vucevic has been asked this season. And we know that the most valuable player on this Chicago Bulls team right now is Alex Caruso. So we have to do our due diligence and see if we can figure out something. The problem is with the front office and with this injury now, not only does it limit everything for the Chicago Bulls now that Zach LaVine is hurt, it does give us an insight on what the hell our front office is about, because we know that these guys don't really do shit. That's it. They don't really do shit. That's it. Now, how can the Chicago Bulls clean this mess up? I mean, you look at guys like Lonzo Ball, you look at guys like Zach LaVine, and you look at guys like Alex Caruso. You weigh what contract do they have? You weigh what players can you potentially get for these players to come in, and then you look at who has current value right now before the trade deadline. You ask me, I believe Alex Caruso has the most trade value on the Chicago Bulls. But that's going to be up to the front office to determine if they want to move Alex Caruso out the way in hopes that you get some good solid role players and maybe some assets along with them to see if you can push the Chicago Bulls up further than what we believe they can go. Because as of right now, I only believe that the Chicago Bulls can go and be a play-in team and maybe a first-round team, but they will be getting kicked out of that. That's how I'm looking at the entire thing. So how does Zach LaVine injury affect the Chicago Bulls plans at the trade deadline? It gives the Chicago Bulls limited opportunities. It make a lot of things difficult. It make a lot of things have to come to the table and you have tough conversations. That's what it looks like for me. The Chicago Bulls have an opportunity to clean a lot of this shit up, but it's going to come with a lot of tough decisions. Those tough decisions, I believe, start with DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, and Nikola Vucevic, and maybe even Lonzo Ball, depending on how you look at all those things. Those limited opportunities within the trade market, since Zach LaVine is now down, has hindered the Chicago Bulls in a major way. They have to now consider other things and other ways to become better. I understand that they want win now players, but sometimes in this situation, you got to give up what you believe in and just come to the realization and come down to the reality on what you actually, excuse me, on what you actually can get for whatever player you have placed on the trade market. Whether that's Alex Caruso, whether that's Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, whoever you place on now on this trade block, you have to see if you can get something feasible for you and your organization. Me personally, when you place guys on a trade deadline, on a trade block, you're not going to always win the trade with whoever team you're trading with. You're not going to always win. But if you're the Chicago Bulls, you have to see if you can make a difference among the players that you have right now as currently constructed. So we shall see. We shall see. Me, personally, I think that Zach LaVine affects the Bulls' plans a little bit, but at the end of the day, we know that the Chicago Bulls haven't done shit in the last few years. So we have to wait and see. So I don't think Zach LaVine's injury affects the Chicago Bulls that much, but we shall see. We shall see. And that's it for me, y'all. That's it for me today. Just want to go ahead and provide y'all with a quick hitter to talk about the effects of Zach LaVine's injury on the Chicago Bulls heading into the trade deadline that is just a few days away. Make sure you are locked in, tuned in. You hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notification bell as well. So every time we drop, you'll be one of the first ones to know. That's it for me today. Chime in below. Let me know your thoughts below. This is another episode of Shy Bulls Podcast. I'm Bobby. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one for sure. Cognac. Gang.